Hey, right, I'm still fiddling with this, sorry. I'm not using the machine I normally use because it broke literally the day before I flew away. So let me see. So I'm kind of, yeah. Cool. I don't think this clicker's going to work. Oh, this is good fun. Sorry, this is totally the way you want to start your talk. Is my click? Okay, maybe it decided to work literally at the very last minute. I don't think I can get rid of the URL at the top. That's what I was trying to do, but forgive me. We'll just go with this how it is because I've had like a lot of tech fails this week. Okay, anyway. Ignore the URL. I thought I could get rid of it, but I couldn't, so there you go. Anyway, hello, good morning. My name is Sarah Young, and today I'm going to talk to you about planes and security. I kind of like planes. I spend quite a lot of time on them just because I live in Australia. So, is it working? No? You didn't want to work? Maybe? Love tech. Yes? No? Okay, you were working a second ago, but... Okay, maybe I will have to... Are you sure? Oh, so you work if I point that way. Okay, right. So, I have not just updated my job title, but I am a principal. I got promoted last week. Woo! But I haven't updated my slides. So I am a principal security advocate at Microsoft. I've worked in security for about 10 years. I talk about security all the time, basically my job. I wrote some NMS press books. I have a podcast, which disturbingly, we've been going for like 4 years now, and quite a lot of people download it. I mean, it's pretty niche, like Azure security, but there you go. So if you do any Azure, Microsoft security stuff, you might want to listen if you don't. And I've got 2 dogs that are really cute. Obviously not here. That's kind of my life. I'm a cool mid-30s professional single woman with 2 dogs. But what am I actually going to talk about today? And I'm going to talk about safety stuff. Because security can be seen as safety. And I love planes, okay? They are, as my mother would put it, great bits of kit. That is actually how she phrases it. But planes are very impressive. I'm not an engineer in that sort of sense at all, but planes, obviously, they cost hundreds of millions of dollars. They are some incredibly smart people work on them. They have lots of safety systems, etc. And when I was younger, some people who know how much I travel might find this funny if you haven't seen this talk before and I haven't already told you, but I used to be terrified of flying. I used to hate it because I used to watch my mum, and my mum is scared of flying, and I think I kind of learned to be scared from her. Now, I am also proof that exposure therapy helps because I have flown so much that no longer do I care at all about planes because I just spend hours on them. So I actually ended up, though, because I realized it was quite detrimental to what I was doing in my life, wanted to teach myself a little bit about how planes work. Because my idea was if I knew more about them, I would be less scared. So inadvertently, I've become a little bit of a plane geek. Not hardcore, I will say, not hardcore, but I've become a bit of a plane geek because I tried to teach myself about them so I wouldn't be so scared. And it turns out they're really interesting. So and that's good. I've given you random Sarah's story, but what is the point of that and IT security? Well, it turns out that if you actually go and look at the aviation industry and other industries that have a big focus on safety, so things like manufacturing and mining, they actually do a lot of the same things that we do in security. But they're actually quite a lot better at it than us because they're more established and they're more mature. So we're going to have a look at that today. First of all, going to talk to you about what we call the Swiss cheese model of safety. We're going to look at aviation safety management systems. Don't go to sleep. Oh, no. Look, my computer's gone to sleep. Like I said, I don't use this computer that much. I'm going to have to, I'll have to go through the slides quick enough so it doesn't do that. Damn. We're going to look at how aircraft accidents are assessed. We'll also look at some accidents over the years and then finally, what can we take from this as IT people, devs, or any other IT professionals? What can we take from this that's useful? So, trigger warning, if it wasn't obvious from what I've just said, I am going to talk about some aircraft accidents. And people died, and it wasn't very nice. So if you're scared of flying, or you're a little bit sensitive to this topic, this may not be the talk for you. This is the time to leave. I will not be insulted. I don't think this sort of topic's for everyone. So yeah, just thought I would mention that. Also, a disclaimer, I am not a hardcore aviation geek, not at all. I spend a lot of time on planes. I can appreciate the amazing bits of engineering, and some very clever people work on them. And I watch YouTube videos of aircraft accidents because I think it is quite interesting. So if anybody here is a pilot, or you work in the aviation industry, or you're a really hardcore AV geek, and I get some of these little details wrong, forgive me. I am trying my best to keep it as accurate as I can. You know what? The very first time I gave this talk, which was in Perth, big ups to DDD Perth, actually a pilot, a guy who was a pilot, got laid off during COVID and retrained in IT, came up to me at the end and said I didn't do too bad. So I was like, great, I'll take that. So let's move on to some actual stuff. First of all, we're going to look at this Swiss cheese model of safety. Now, I'm going to show you, you may have seen something similar. Now, in security, we would call this defense in depth. And the idea being that we have multiple safety layers or security controls in an IT sense. And the idea is if one of them fails, if something goes wrong, there's another control that will stop the bad thing happening. And it's only when multiple bad things go wrong that the accident happens. And this is great because it's exactly the same in aviation and safety. Planes don't just fall out of the sky because one thing goes wrong. Like the planes, if you have an aviation accident, there's multiple layers that have gone wrong, and we'll look at that when we get to the stories. This is also known, the proper name for this is called Reason's approach, by the way, which is, the guy was actually called Reason. And I think it's really, really interesting. So, you know, we're going to look at this. Now, this is going to hopefully start running. So this is a model that was made from the New Zealand perspective. Now, you may remember in COVID, New Zealand closed the borders. New Zealand dealt with COVID very effectively. And this is a nice little GIF that tells you about it. Because what New Zealand wanted to do was get rid of COVID-19 out of New Zealand, and then they wanted to let the country largely run as normal. I mean, I know that was difficult, but they used the Swiss cheese model. So, as I said, a gentleman called James Reason made this Swiss cheese model, and it was to do with accidents. And you know, nothing's perfect, nothing works 100% of the time, which is why you need these layers. So let's have a look at this from when New Zealand did COVID-19. So they did the border closures. And then they had border controls even for the New Zealand citizens that were allowed in. And for the New Zealand citizens that were allowed in, they had to go into hotel quarantine. So that was one side of the layers of controls they did. Then for the people who were at home, they had to do physical distancing. So physical distancing, hand washing, you know, the stuff that everybody did. And then when if there was a person who had COVID, they did contract testing, and then they would isolate them. Now, I know for anybody who lived on our side of the world when COVID happened, we did a lot. We also did lockdowns like other countries did. But New Zealand was very, very good, you may remember, at actually being able to deal with COVID-19. So, of course, not everybody did all of these layers, but you can see here there are so many layers: wearing masks, hand washing, and different people do different controls. And that was how we stopped COVID spreading, or tried to. I was actually living in New Zealand at the time. I actually got stuck there. So this is going to go around again. But again, these safety systems, we actually see them in loads of places in the world: medicine, aviation, etc. So who here, by the way, does anybody here actually work in security or maybe deal with security risk stuff? Few of you. Okay, good. So in aviation, they have something called aviation safety management systems, which sounds so incredibly boring, I know. Now, aviation safety management systems, when I started reading up about this, because there's a lot of publicly accessible material from different countries, it turns out that aviation safety management systems, they have policies where they say, you know, we're going to assign these key personnel to be accountable for these safety systems. They say we're going to do risk management where you identify the hazards and then we plan some mitigations. sounds familiar. This is exactly what we do in IT security. We look for hazards, threat modeling, and then we look at how we can mitigate those risks, so security controls. So I'm like, sounds very similar. Safety assurance, so monitoring it. Now, if you are mature in your security doings in your organization, you may well find that you're monitoring your security controls. How effective are they? Do you actually have breaches, etc.? And then finally, safety promotion. Now, this one's really interesting. Who here's done a phishing fire drill where you've had to not click on the link and hit report? Yeah. So same kind of thing, promoting a safety culture or a security culture. So I couldn't believe how incredibly similar the thinking is when you actually think about it. And then this is something I pulled from the Australian Civil Aviation Authority's website, positive safety culture. So it's actually interesting because it seems in other industries exactly the same as security. It's very easy. I always say, in security, it is very easy to say, I'm going to turn on this firewall. I'm going to do this, whatever it is. Technical controls are relatively straightforward. The difficult thing is people, because you can have the best security controls in the world, and if someone's putting their username and password on a Post-it note somewhere, it's game over. And it's exactly the same in so the people side of things is very, very challenging, and it's exactly the same in other industries. So you can see here in aviation, they want to promote a positive safety culture. So it's things like, reporting when things go wrong, people not being scared of a backlash, and we'll talk about that in some real-life examples in a bit. But also learning, and also we find this in security. Has anyone got bored of doing security training? Who tries to click through it as fast as they possibly can? Yeah, exactly, right? And no, look, I'm not saying that probably most of the people in here know kind of what the security training is saying. But that whole psychological thing around fatigue, being like, oh my God, I can't be bothered, click, 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 how fast can I do it, is also a problem, because there might be something in there that's slightly different that you need to know. And that's just human nature, and we're dealing with this in other industries too. So sometimes I think cybersecurity likes to pretend like we're the only people dealing with these kind of challenges. There's no other challenge like cybersecurity, and it's actually not true. It's how people work and how our minds think, I'm no psychologist, is actually very similar. And I used to work for my sins for a Big Four a number of years ago, and we did a lot of risk management. I used to try and get out of risk management because I'd be like, oh, I don't understand risk management, which is not true because really anybody can understand it. Don't know if my pointer's going to work. Oh, it is. Lovely. So if anybody has done some risk management around IT issues, security issues. First of all, we try and, threat model, we work out what the risk is. Then we do this severity analysis. So in cybersecurity, we look at things, how we rate things. We'll say, okay, this is a terrible thing that could happen, but what's the likelihood of it happening? And so we give it kind of a score. Same thing here. So you could say, what are the chances that the wing will fall off the plane just randomly? Pretty low. But if it happened, would it be quite catastrophic? Yes. I realize that's over-exaggerated. Anyone who's scared of flying, wings don't just fall off planes, but like, I over-exaggerate. And then we look at, the probability, and then we look at the assessment. We assess this risk. Is this a risk we can accept? Because security is not always about fixing everything, because we can't fix everything. It's just not possible. So is this something that we need to put some mitigations in for, some extra controls? Do we need to put extra screws on the wings, or whatever it is, to make sure that doesn't happen? And then we say yes or no, and then we go round and round and round. For those of you who've never done risk management in security, it is actually a completely acceptable thing to say, yes, we recognize this as a risk, but we're not going to do anything about it because it costs too much money, it's not very likely. You can accept the risk of something because nothing's 100% anyway. And then this was my favorite. I found this, the ICAO is the international board for flying stuff. I've literally forgotten their name now, so apologies. They have the best PowerPoint I've ever seen in my life. Look at this clip art. This is amazing. They were talking about this safety management system, and safety should be in all parts of the system. And this is very similar to what we say in IT: people, tools, materials, equipment, software, because security is not just tech, it's not just people, it's processes, it's the whole thing. And then this phrase I found very, very interesting: maintain a balance between production and protection. So let's think about this. Who here has gone to a security team and they've just said, no, you can't do that, it's not secure? No. I know. Okay, so that's not very helpful, right? Because you're trying to build a thing or make a product or whatever it is, or improve a process, and security have just said, no, you can't do that, it's insecure. Now, that happens. I know it does. We are getting better, by the way. Please give us another chance. Like, security is trying to not be like that. But essentially, security should be this balance between production and protection, because if you tried to make everything 100% secure, businesses wouldn't function. And if you think about this looking at it from an aviation perspective, the only way the aviation industry could 100% say that we're never going to have a plane crash is if the plane never took off. And that is completely ridiculous, of course. I think it's hard, for some reason, if you say that in the context of aviation, it sounds absolutely ridiculous. If they said, oh, well, we can't take the risk that the plane could crash, so the plane just needs to stay in the airport. I mean, you know, they're not going to make any money, it would be ridiculous. But yet in IT, some of our security people do that. They say, oh, you just can't do it. It is more of a security person problem. We're working on it, we're getting better. But I think, I think it's good that, like I said, some industries have kind of got better at that. No, it's going to do it again. I thought I was clicking through enough. I'm trying to time the slide so it doesn't do that. But let's have a look at this one. So I would love to see statistics on this in cyber. I don't think we ever will. But this is a graph of as the aviation industry has analyzed accidents, and like I said, we'll get onto that. You can see how, as they've been analyzing accidents and then making changes to processes and technology to reduce the likelihood of those happening again, you can see how accidents have actually decreased massively over the years. Now, we do not have statistics like this in cybersecurity, unfortunately, because, of course, many organizations do not publicly disclose, if they can get away with it, if they've had some kind of breach. I would love to see one day, there are some jurisdictions that are bringing in mandatory reporting of cyber issues, but we haven't quite got there yet, and there is quite a lot of pushback from industry. But I think it would be very interesting to see. I don't think we would see this nice curve, sadly, in the same way. But maybe one day we will. Right. Just for those of you who don't watch lots of YouTube videos about this in your spare time, let's have a quick look at how we assess aircraft accidents. So what they do, lovely little post-mortem here. They go collect evidence. They will then examine said evidence. They will draft a report. It is internally reviewed by whichever organization is doing the report. Now, normally how that is decided, if you were wondering, is it normally is a combination of, let's say a plane plunges to the ground and crashes. It will probably be a mix of the country that the airline belonged to and the country that the airline crashed in. It's usually somebody in there usually does it. I don't think there's kind of a fixed process, but they all kind of do the same process. So they will report. They will do an internal review. It will be of the report. Then it will go external. It will be reviewed again by other bodies. And when it's approved, then it will be disseminated to the public. And you can literally go online and read most aircraft investigation reports publicly. They're all out there. This is why a lot of YouTubers do YouTube analysis of them, because you can go and read them. They're all public. So it's very, very transparent and very open. Not like security. Who here, let's think about this, who like willingly discloses security issues? Really? Really? Do you? In your company? Oh, well, yeah, because we're getting there with, that's a regulatory thing, eh? Oh, you're a cybersecurity company. So, okay. That's good, though. But most folks will not do that. Now, the thing is, the aviation industry, in fairness, can't get away with that, because when a plane plunges to the ground, people notice. So generally, they don't have the luxury of trying to cover it up in the same way. But I don't think that covering up actually serves us, because, of course, if we don't share these things, as an industry, can't learn from it. But let's have a look at a couple of aircraft accidents and do a little comparison. So some of these, I'm jumping around a bit on the timeline, so just bear with me. Let's have a look at Air France. This is Air France 447. This was June 2009. I remember this one because I actually was flying to South America shortly after this happened, and I was still in my Sarah is scared of flying phase, and it scared me a little bit. Anyway, if you don't know this one, it was a flight from Rio to Paris. It was Air France. What happened is their pitot tubes, if you don't know what they are, they're like these little tubes. They sit on the front of the plane, and air goes into them, and they measure your speed. They got blocked by ice because they were flying through a thunderstorm, which is not unusual. It tends to be very temporary, and then the ice sort of clears, and you're all back to normal. But while they were blocked, they were giving the pilots some bad readings, and again, not a completely unusual situation. But the pilots got confused, and they managed to stall the plane. Now, if you don't want, and this is not a car stall, it is an aerodynamic stall. If anyone doesn't know what that is, it's basically when the plane gets so slow that the wings don't generate enough lift. If you think about putting your arm out of a car, and you think how your arm kind of goes up, it's that is how planes fly. It's that motion. And so if the plane gets too slow, the wings stop generating lift, and the plane basically plunges to the ground. It's like the #1 thing that pilots are taught not to do is to stall planes, for obvious reasons. And so it crashed, and everybody died. You're going to see a theme here. But the investigation concluded that this accident was not caused by the storm or the ice. It was caused by pilot error. It was an accepted thing that can happen. The way to not have a stall and with weird speed readings is to just put the plane in a very gentle downward position, because that will stop it stalling. And the pilots didn't do that. Now, actually, these guys, I'm going to very quickly click off and click back so my machine doesn't go to sleep. The pilots, there were 3 pilots because it was a long flight. The captain was actually on his break, so it was the 2 more junior pilots. And when the captain came back into the cockpit a couple of minutes after this started, he actually realized what had happened. But unfortunately, they didn't have enough, because they listen to the voice recordings. They didn't have enough height to be able to recover from the stall, which is sucks, man. But the other thing that they called out from this report was that there was too much reliance on automation, because we know that planes use autopilot, but the pilots didn't know how to deal with what was a fairly basic problem, and they said, all of these automation systems are making some of the pilots lose their skills. And we talk about this in IT as well, right? There's so much automation that people are losing some skills and being able to troubleshoot things in the same way. And of course, we're talking about that more with AI as well. So again, similar issues. But also, I think Air France got it in the neck, because this was very basic pilot training that they should have been able to deal with. So going back in time a little to the 1950s. Now, we know that back in the day, aviation did sort of crash a bit more. But this was a very famous one. There was one of the very first ever, I think it was the very first jet plane. It's called a de Havilland Comet. You can see it there. Nice old school picture. There were a number of them that crashed in a fairly short period of time. They were manufactured in Britain. It was a British plane. And at the time, there was no flight recorders, nothing in the 1950s. So, they couldn't go find black boxes. They didn't happen. They would just find the crashed plane. And because of that, it took a number of crashes before they actually worked out what the problem was. And the problem was the windows. Now, you may see on this picture, and you can see it here in this diagram, the windows are not that oval shape that you're used to seeing on planes nowadays. They're like a square. And as I said, this was the very first ever jet plane. And so the difference with jet planes, if you don't know, was that they could fly higher. And of course, then there's the pressure in the the higher you get, the air pressure decreases, but you need to keep the pressure within the plane the same so we can breathe and it's comfortable for us. And basically what was happening was these planes were taking off, and this window shape, I'm massively oversimplifying this, by the way. Please go online and like watch the good YouTuber videos if you find this interesting. But essentially, this shape of the plane, of the window, was every time it pressurized and depressurized, was starting to fatigue the metal. And when these crashes happened, basically the windows were blowing out. There was a massive depressurization, and the plane blew apart. And that is why, and it was to do with the shape of the window, and that is why we have ovals now, because these corners were creating too much fatigue, metal fatigue. So now that's why we have the oval shape, because there's no one pressure point. But this was, and ever since then, jet planes have not had square windows. So again, we're learning from mistakes. But this is, I think, a really nice example, and again, so close. I was just about to click it. So close. This is a really good example of you don't know what you don't know. And I think this is very relevant at the moment when we're looking at AI. Certainly with AI, there are some issues in security terms that we know about, but AI technology is so new, there's a lot of stuff we don't know yet. And I think, and that's been a problem with new technology since the end of time. So this de Havilland, it was new technology at the time. Jet planes were brand new. And they knew there was a pressurization thing that they had to deal with, but because it was so new, they kind of were doing a bit of a finger in the air thing, and then it turns out, of course, that this window shape didn't work. So again, but they learned from that, and you've never seen a plane since then that has these square windows. And you know, this is like 70 years ago. Wow, 70 years ago. Crazy. So again, really good example of similar things learning from mistakes. Okay, so yeah, there were no black boxes. So things that we've learned since then, the pressurized cabin was putting strain on that window shape. The black boxes, well, there were no black boxes in the 1950s. So unfortunately, there were a couple of accidents had to happen before they could work out what was going on. They didn't have good accident investigation procedures at the time. So again, it took them a while to work it out. And pressurized cabins, it was a new technology. And so the risks weren't well understood. They didn't know what they didn't know. So moving on. This was one that I don't think until I was doing research for this talk, I didn't really know this one. Air Blue, it is a Pakistani airline, and it was flying from Karachi to Islamabad. And essentially what happened was the plane flew into a mountain rather than landing at Islamabad, which I clearly not what they intended to do. Now, this one's really interesting because, now I don't really fully understand flight maps, but essentially the plane was coming down here. It was supposed to do a like little loop round and then land. You know how sometimes planes sort of come round and do a UE? I realize planes don't do a UE. That's like Australian, but you know what I mean. It was supposed to come around here, do a UE, and land at Islamabad. But what ended up happening was they ended up all the way over here and like crashed into this mountain range, which was clearly not what they were supposed to do. Now, the first officer actually noticed there was an issue, but he didn't feel he could speak up against the captain. That was, yeah. So basically, a couple of things went wrong here. So the pilot, obviously the pilots, they call it in aviation situational awareness, which is they didn't really understand what was happening, right? They basically like didn't realize they were where they were because clearly they did not intend to go into a mountain range. The first officer was too scared to speak up against the captain, because at the beginning of the flight, because they did have the voice recorder, the captain had sat and grilled the first officer on some random aviation things. And it wasn't a training flight. There was no need for him to do this. In fact, it was kind of inappropriate. But he was grilling the captain. He was grilling the first officer, sorry, saying, you know, what do you know about this, blah, blah, blah. And the first officer kind of felt a bit, and he didn't feel like he could speak up against the captain, even though he did try one time on the recording to be like, sir, I think we're going the wrong way, but the captain ignored him. He didn't feel like he could push it. And so, yeah, it could have been averted then. That's one layer of safety. The airport at the time, their air traffic control had no radar, so they didn't realize the plane had gone way, way, way away from where it was supposed to be. And then the captain also ignored, all airports have something called a minimum descent level. And it does vary what that level is depending on the airport. But essentially, if you can't see the runway at your minimum descent level, you're supposed to go around and have another go. He didn't do that, and that was a procedure that he deliberately broke. This captain seemed like a bit arrogant and full of himself, and he was like, oh, I can't see the airport, it can't see the runway, but we'll be fine, let's keep going. And also, the air traffic control, they told them to go a different way into the airport that wasn't on the charts. Again, not what they were supposed to do. And so it was really a culture issue. You know, a lot of this was people more than anything else. Now, they used something which I find really fascinating. I'm going to click out and click back because I don't want that to do the thing. It's called CRM. And now, CRM in the context of aviation is called crew resource management. And that's the idea that every single member of the crew should be able to speak up if they think there's a problem without fear of repercussion. Even if it's the first officer speaking up to the captain saying, hey, captain, I think you've made a mistake. Now, in this situation, the first officer didn't do that. He didn't feel empowered to be able to do that. Has anybody here ever felt like someone more senior to them is doing something wrong, but because they're like more senior, they kind of felt awkward about saying something? Yeah, exactly. Okay. Now, I realize it's not maybe life and death in quite the same way as an aeroplane, but it's the same idea. It should be that anyone who realizes there's a mistake or a safety issue should be able to speak up. And this first officer did not feel like he could do that. Unfortunately, as I was saying before, the Pakistani Aviation Authority did the report for this because it was a Pakistani airline and it happened in Pakistan. But their report is very, very sparse compared with other countries. And it's really sad that they literally just put the blame on the pilots. All they said was, pilots were dumb, pilots didn't do the right approach, pilots got lost, blah. They didn't look at like anything else. And obviously outside people have analyzed it saying, you know, the airport didn't have radar, it sounds like they had a culture issue, blah, 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 but they just very squarely blame the issue on the pilots. And we actually see that in IT as well. Has anybody, again, fess up, has anybody here had like say a production incident or even a security breach, and rather than looking at the bigger picture, have just like pointed at one person or maybe a team saying they did this? I'm seeing some nods, even if I'm seeing some like very like, yes, exactly. And what I like about what aviation does is now they say, okay, yes, that was like the immediate reason something happened, but why did the people behave like that? Was it a culture thing? Was it a training thing? And I don't think we are nearly at that level of maturity. We were nearly at that level of maturity in IT, and I think that's a real shame. I'm really sorry about this, by the way. This is like a noob error with my machine. But as I said, I don't normally use this machine for presenting. So yeah. And then now this one, you can see here, look, does this guy not look like the most stereotypical pilot you've ever seen? Right. So this is probably one of the most famous air disasters in the world, probably before 2001. It is. This is still this is the single biggest loss of life ever, even today, that was just an airline accident. So it was 583 people died. And if you do not know this one, this is, again, I'm massively simplifying some of these. Please go watch the good videos on YouTube if you want to know all the details. Two jumbo jets, 747s, collided with each other in Tenerife. And the two planes, one was a Dutch plane, a KLM, and one was Pan Am, so a US plane. This was the KLM pilot. He was like one of the top pilots. He was called Captain Van Zaventem, and he also did their promotional material, as you can see here, with his cheesy smile. Now, what went wrong? So, again, I simplify a long story. Neither plane should have been at Tenerife to begin with. They were only at Tenerife because they've been diverted because the airport they were both going to got closed because of a bomb scare. Now, if you've been to Tenerife, you know, and I'm sure many of you have here, you know that Tenerife has Mount Teide, and because it's got that volcano, or dead volcano, it gets a lot of fog and cloud very quickly just because of the way the island is shaped. And as the planes were preparing to depart, radar, a load of fog came into the airport. And essentially, they couldn't really see each other. And also, there was no radar again, because this was the 70s. Not every single airport had radar. And the air traffic control, essentially, the KLM plane took off when the Pan Am was still taxiing around, and it shouldn't have. The air traffic control just said, yep, you can. They didn't use the standard phrases, and Captain Van Zaventem, who wanted to get going because he wanted to go home, no joke, the first officer again said, I don't think Pan Am's clear of the runway. And again, the captain ignored him, so a people issue. And because there was fog, they couldn't see properly. And essentially, the KLM plane took off. I'm going to do this again. The KLM plane took off and bashed into the Pan Am. What was really sad, another thing, they actually saw the plane and they tried to take off, but they clipped it and, everybody on the Dutch plane died. A lot of people died on the American plane. What was really sad is that in a rush to get home, whilst they were on the ground, this guy actually refueled the plane to make it heavier, and so it needed longer to take off. And they reckon that if he hadn't have refueled it, it probably would have cleared the Pan Am plane. It's super sad. So many things, like little things. And yeah, it's really sad. And then you may know I'm sure lots of you know that with like plane radios, if more than one person is talking on the frequency, it like makes interference. And so they actually missed a couple of key communications. Really, really sad, obviously. Shouldn't have happened. But again, you can see these layers of different things going wrong before this horrible accident happened. Now, this one, though, yeah, really sucked. Now, this last one, I think the last one, Air India. Now, this is the reason, this particular flight is the reason. Who here has had an aeroplane delay because they've had to remove bags from a plane of someone who's not made the plane? Because they have to offload the bags. This flight is why that happens. And as you can see, this was back in the 80s. So this was a flight from Montreal to London to Delhi to Bombay. The plane was blown up. This was kind of the biggest loss of life for terrorists, for a terrorist activity before 2001. It was blown up over the Atlantic Ocean by a terrorist group, a Sikh terrorist group that were campaigning for an independent Sikh state in India. It was a jumbo jet, so 300-odd people died, and the bomb was in luggage that had been checked into the hold of the plane. Now, what happened was the gentleman, one of the terrorists, he went to check in Montreal, and they said to him, you can't check this all the way through, and he basically pressured this poor check-in agent. Oh, sorry, not Montreal, Vancouver, because he actually started the trip in Vancouver, and he said, I want you to check this all the way through to India, and they were like, we don't do that, that's not a policy. And he was like, how dare you, I'm a business class passenger, don't treat me like this. And eventually this check-in agent actually relented and said, okay, I'll check it all the way through. Then that guy only flew the first leg and got off the plane. And at the time, they didn't sort of check these things. Also, the luggage was x-rayed several times, but in Toronto, the luggage x-ray machine had broken that day, and they were using handheld devices, the baggage guys, to scan it. Now, one of these devices made a small beep, but the handlers weren't trained on what to do. They thought it had to make a really big beep before it was a problem. So they could have caught it then, and they didn't. And at the time, bags in the hold without passengers attached to them weren't offloaded. So, of course, you can see there were many points where this could have been caught, and it wasn't. And again, it's a combination of technical things, that x-ray machine, training, process, etc. So there's so many things that can go wrong before this accident happened. Click. Are we clicking? Anyway, so there's some really depressing stories for you about things that have gone wrong, but also we can see from this that we can learn from it. So in tech, if you're in tech, what can we learn from all this aviation stuff? Too much automation can lead to loss of essential skills. It is important that we keep up our essential skills. If you break something, you cause a breach, you need to have the skills to be able to fix something. I am all up for automating as much as you possibly can to make your life easier. But it is important that if the automation fails, you know how to deal with it. No one is infallible. People make mistakes. You need to make sure that your organization, your team is a safe space for people to speak up. Because junior people can see things that are wrong, and senior people mess up. Like, it can't be that the most senior person can never be questioned. It's really important. Procedures, they reduce the likelihood of misunderstandings. There's a couple of places here where there was no procedure in place, or a procedure wasn't followed. And so it is important to have like procedures and also make sure people follow them. Everyone is susceptible to social engineering. You can see there's been several, particularly that last example there, where the check-in agent, the guy basically bullied her and pushed her into not following her process. And, you know, obviously it had bad consequences. Everyone's susceptible to this. And also, you don't know what you don't know. So, you know, going back to the 1950s, they didn't know that square windows would fatigue massively on the corners every time the aircraft was pressurized. So as we discover new technologies, do new things, you know, we don't know what we don't know from a security perspective. We don't know every attack, so be mindful. Obviously, think as best you can about what threats you believe should be there, but keep an open mind that there could be something that you can't think of. Thorough post-mortems are so essential to avoid repeat mistakes and issues. This is the one thing I want you to take away from this talk, if nothing else. We are not so good at this. Whether it's a production issue or whether it's a cybersecurity breach, we are not as good at other industries at doing these post-mortems. Like, often it's blame a team, blame an individual, blame a server, whatever, blame an application, whatever it is, and then we move on. Whereas in other industries, they're much more mature. They're going through it saying, hey, it was technical, it was people, it was process. There are a number of things we can improve. And you can see, this is why we offload bags. This is why we do security scanning. This is why airplane windows are round, because they did the post-mortems, and those learnings were shared with the industry to uplift everybody to a better state. And I don't think we're nearly as good in technology as other industries at doing that yet. Remember that those Swiss cheese holes can line up. You've got to try and make it as unlikely as possible, have a lot of different layers of protection, but we also say in security, assume breach. Assume that at some point you will be breached. So make sure you have lots of layers that will reduce the harm that could possibly happen. Anybody here been on a plane that's had to do like an emergency landing? I'm sure a few of you have, I have. But that was a good thing. A couple of those layers failed, but still the plane landed and no one was hurt. So it works. But what you don't want is for not to have enough of those layers that you can't rescue a situation. And that's me today. I don't know what I'm doing for time. I've done all right. Sorry about the laptop. As I said, don't usually present off this one. Apologies for my newbiness. That is not a dodgy QR code. It will give you a link. I always have to say this, I'm a security person. That'll take you to a link of like some good YouTube videos if you want to go read about some of these accidents in more detail. I'll hang around a bit. I've got stickers and stuff, usual thing. Enjoy the rest of DevFest. Hopefully you found that interesting and not too depressing to talk about airline accidents. But yeah, thanks very much, folks, and have a good rest of your time here.